Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of APSA, welcome to the technical session of the ASEAN Seed Congress, Standing Committee on Seed Technology 2017 in Bangkok, Thailand. My name is Kunaporn Pantunin, Membership Programs Officer from APSA. And once again, I'm saying this for 8 times already. You can call me Kuna. As a membership programs officer, I'll be here to support our members regarding to technical programs and study tours. Although this is the last technical session for this event, I would say that the importance of this session is in top priority. If you are interested to join activities in this group, our chair, Mr. Johan van Asbrouk, is here to update you in a moment about our exciting future plan in 2018. So let me not wasting time, may I invite the chair of this session, Mr. Johan from Central Thai, and co-chair, Mr. Zhuo Qiyang from Taiwan Agricultural Research Institute to be on the stage, please. May I also invite the chair of this session, Mr. Johan, for the opening remarks, please? Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. It's always good to be at a congress like APSA. And it's always even better when we know that it's almost finished and we can go back home. But just before APSA will be completely closed and we have the big banquet this evening, the last session is seed technology. I always say the best are coming the last. I don't want to say the others are not good, but I think we are a quite important committee. Therefore, I would not like to waste a lot of time, but I would like to go first of all directly to the agenda of today. We will have a speaker where I believe that we can all learn a lot about an important aspect in seed technology, an aspect that we all know that makes a lot of difficulties, especially in our region, the tropical regions, humidity, temperature. It makes a hell of a difference. After his speech, I would like to have a decent discussion with all of you about the future of this committee. What should we do? What is needed? How can we do? It's a question that comes back every year, but till now I did not have the right answer. I don't know really what we can do, what we should do, and how we should do that. So we will do that at the end of the session. Okay, therefore I would like to give the microphone to the co-chair to introduce our speaker of today.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's my honor to introduce you today's speaker, Professor Ken Bradford. He is a distinguished professor in the Department of Plant Science at UC Davis. And of course, he graduated over there. And after the postdoctoral fellowship at the Australian National University, I was there 1 month ago. It's a very beautiful and good university. And, after that, he joined the faculty at UC Davis in 1982, and also served as the chair of the Department of Vegetable Crops from 1993 to 1998. In 1999, he founded the UC Davis Seed Biotechnology Center and continued to serve as its director. He received several awards including Fulbright Scholar Award and the Korea Seed Science Award, and distinct from the College of Agricultural and Environmental Science at UC Davis. Now he is also the resident fellow at the Rockefeller Center in Bradford, Italy. He has extended his research to several fields, from seed germination to conservation to mathematics, model, and molecular biology. As a director of the Seed Biotechnology Center, he supports the creation and the commercialization of new technology to improve crop performance, quality, sustainability, and the continued education of the plant breeders and seed industry professionals. So today he is going to present the topic, implementing the dry chain to maintain seed quality. Dr. Bradford, please come forward to the stage. The floor is yours. Thank you. Let's give him a big hand, please.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction, Dr. Yang. Appreciate that. And Johan, thank you for the invitation to be here. Certainly my pleasure to be here to discuss this topic with you of seed quality, which has been the driving motivation for my career, I would say, from all aspects. That is, so many aspects of seed are critical, and the little phase that I like to work on is producing the seeds, keeping their quality, and then seeing how they perform when the farmers plant them. So that's are going to be our focus today. So I'm sure that if this was your field trial, if you planted the ones that didn't come up, if that was your variety, you'd be disappointed. If the ones that came up were your variety, you'd be happy. This is an extreme example, but this can happen. One set of those seeds, those onion seeds, was stored well and had high viability. The others didn't, and there you see bare ground. So those are situations that your field representatives don't like to see. So we know we have to have high viability and vigorous seedlings to establish crops. Even before complete death, we also would like to have rapid and uniform germination, get more uniform plant establishment, which makes easier management for the farmer, more synchronized harvests, lower cost because of management efficiencies, single harvests and so on, higher yields and so on. So high seed quality, as we know, is really critical for your customers and growers. That starts back in the production field, so I'm not going to spend much time on that, but it's critical to start with high quality. So if we look at how the quality of seeds develops during their production, they become viable fairly early in seed development, but somewhat later they develop high vigor. That is, you can have seeds that are viable in a germination test, but not very vigorous under more stressful conditions. And that's been known a long time. More recently, it's been demonstrated that the last quality factor to develop is the longevity of the seeds. That is, even after you have high vigor, then there's a further stage of development where the potential to be stored for a long time develops as well. It's very important. So if we look, you could harvest the seeds at this early time point if you wanted to, and you would maybe in a normal seedling test immediately you might get a good rating, but they're really of low vigor and they have almost no storage life. So it'd be very risky to sell seeds that were at that stage of development. If we wait a bit longer, we would then have potential for good vigor and good viability, but the storage life might be rather short. So at that point, it would be time you could sell those seeds. It would be fine. Now, the problem is, of course, when you harvest seeds from the field, you probably have a mixture of these, and you don't know necessarily which are which. But if you wait for full maturity and all of the components have developed, then you have high vigor, good storage, and you can store these seeds for a considerable period of time, assuming you use the right conditions, which will be the main focus today. And if we think about what we lose during storage, in fact, these are in reverse order. Obviously, the first thing to go is the potential longevity. So as you store seeds, their remaining life, of course, gets shorter and shorter. Their vigor will then decline, and then viability will go down as well. So they will lose their quality in this opposite direction. So in this case, at this point, as we're storing seeds, we think to sell them, this is the time to start thinking about selling them because their quality is going to start declining after that. If you wait until you've lost most of the storage life, but the vigor is still good, you can sell them, but into better conditions. Don't let them last too long, and so on. If you wait until this point, it may look good to you when it leaves the shop, but by the time it gets to the farmer, it's risky. It may not perform as well. So these things are all considerations, of course, in providing your farmers with good quality and the reputation of your company. So how long does these seeds last? This is what we'll spend most of our time on. If we have very good storage conditions, this is the type of pattern we tend to see. That is, there's a fairly long period of high quality and then a fairly rapid period of death. So there's a lag phase, there's a potential storability period under good conditions that can be of variable length. It depends on the species and it depends very highly on the conditions. But you have the potential for quite a long period without losing viability. If you have not such good conditions, that lag period is shortened and they're going to die quicker. And if you have very bad conditions, then you have almost no lag period. That is, they start to lose quality almost immediately. So aging already in the field, poor handling even to get them to your warehouse and so on, you can lose a certain fraction of that period. So the goal as a seedsman is to preserve as much of that initial phase as you possibly can. That is, they will never get better. When you take them from the field, that's as good as they're going to get. All you can do is slow down that process, and that's what we're going to focus on today. So what we need to also realize is that lag period, even though they're at high viability, now we're also losing vigor. And that can be shown by the speed of germination, for example. So early on, the seeds will be very uniform. They germinate rapidly. This is the best possible condition for everyone. A little bit longer, they still will all germinate, but somewhat slower. Later, they're on the verge. They're quite slow. They're less uniform. They're more dispersed. It's not going to show up as good for you. If we wait till later, until after some of them have started to die, then the remaining seeds are very slow. The final germination doesn't reach 100%, and really those seeds are have lost their lifetime. So again, what we really want to do is preserve as much of this initial period, because the further we can push this back to the left side, the higher the quality, the better performance, and so on. And we really want to focus on preserving as much of that initial quality as we can. So what determines good, adequate, excellent storage, and so on? The moisture content is probably the most important factor. Temperature is also important, but I'm going to focus on moisture content today. So this would be examples of how seed storage would work. That is the shortest time, let's call it 10% moisture content. Intermediate time, you get longer with 9%, you get more with 8%. And in fact, this has been known for quite a long time. In fact, my predecessor at UC Davis, Jim Harrington, back in the 1970s, created the Harringtons Rule, which was that the seed longevity will double for every 1% reduction in moisture content, or it was 10% Fahrenheit, about 6 degrees, 10 degrees Fahrenheit, about 6 degrees decrease in temperature. So what this means is that if we lower for 1%, we get double. If we lower it 2%, we get 4 times. If we lower it 3%, we get 8 times. So you can see you can get huge gains in longevity by fairly small changes in seed moisture content. So that's been known quite a long time. Another way to think about it is what I call my Metronome Rule. So I only tell this people in person, so I have never published this really. Well, we have a model. We have published that this works, so I believe this. But in fact, the way you can think about this is that a seed has a specific lifetime, and it's ticking. The clock is ticking for that seed. Let's say that it has 1,000 ticks, and then it's going to die. Well, you can go at a very slow pace like this if you have very good storage conditions, or you can have, you can have that thing going like that. If the moisture content's high, the temperature's high, you're going to use those 1,000 ticks really fast. So basically, that's the way we can think about seeds. That's the way our model works. It describes seed storage very well. That is, there's a maximum lifetime to a seed, and you either use up those minutes or those hours or those days very quickly, or you slow them down. That is, clock time doesn't matter to seeds. It's really biological time in a sense. That is very sensitive to moisture content. Here's some data from a project we've been working on. This was done in, actually in India with onion seed, and the bars are individual 6 different storage locations and so on, but you see the performance is very consistent. That if those seeds were stored at 9% moisture content for a year, and you can see on the left side, they went from 80% germination to 40%. So basically, they fell off that curve that I was talking about. They immediately started dying, and by part the way through that, they're not really going to be very good for you to sell. On the right side, it shows the same seeds stored at 5% moisture content throughout. That is, we dried them further, we put them in a box where they just were protected from moisture, and you can see over the full year, almost no change at all in germination. So this is at ambient conditions. It's not cooling at all. This is simply manipulating the moisture content. You can see full year later, those seeds were perfectly okay. They had lost some time. I mean, it's not like time isn't moving. It's just that they'd moved very little along that timeline of their lifetime. So I want to take a little bit of time now to talk about moisture content, because we tend to think a lot about moisture content. That's the traditional way to think about seed moisture. But I'd like to move you today to think a little more about relative humidity, because that is a factor that is present all the time and that is really much more relevant for storage, as I'll explain. So for any given product, really, at all, but seeds specifically, there's a relationship between the equilibrium relative humidity and the moisture content. So if we take a set of seeds and we put it inside a container and you let it come to equilibrium, moisture will evaporate into the air or it will be taken up by the seed. When that comes to equilibrium, there will be a relationship between the humidity in the box and the moisture content of the seed. If the seeds were very dry when you put them in the box, humidity will equilibrate very low. If they're quite moist, it'll equilibrate high. So what that really means is that we can use either moisture content or humidity as our factor. That is, they refer to virtually the identical thing. The difference, though, is that the correct moisture content for storage changes with the type of seed. So as shown here, at a given humidity, if you look at the line going up at 65% humidity, a peanut seed is at about 8%, 6, 7, 8% moisture content, but a maize or cowpea or rice is about 13. So if we think in moisture content, we have to correct ourselves for every species. You have to know that species, you have to know what moisture content is correct, and you have to aim for that. That's not a problem for experts. It's very straightforward. But on the other hand, if we think in terms of humidity, we get more or less similar storage for all seeds at a common equilibrium relative humidity. So if we go back to the left, if we come back and dry this down, we're going to get more or less similar type of effect on all those seeds regardless of their moisture content. So for the purposes of storage, we really should be thinking and comparing things on the basis of humidity. It's much more convenient, and I'll tell a little more about that in a minute. Of course, we buy and sell by weight, so you want to know how much water you're buying and so on. So there's a reason to have total moisture content, fresh weight moisture content, and so on. But when we're thinking about storage and we're thinking about storage environments, it's much more convenient to work in terms of humidity. Because, as I said, the storage life is relatively similar when we put it on a moisture content basis, whereas it's not really, if we go on a on a moisture content basis, it's different, but on a humidity basis, it's the same. And I'll go back to this curve I showed a while ago. These are the moisture contents, and if this was rice, those are approximately the corresponding relative humidities for rice. So it's 45 at 10%, 38% at 9%, 31% humidity at 8% moisture. Those actually are not bad conditions. You can get intermediate, that's sort of medium-term storage, could be achieved with that. If that crop was radish, though, and those were the moisture contents, the corresponding moisture contents for radish are 80%, 70%, and 60%. those are where the clock is ticking very, very fast. So if you're really trying to use the same moisture content for different species, you're going to be misled. Whereas if we think of getting them all down to 25, 30% relative humidity, they're all going to be safe. As shown here, for rice seed, that's not that bad of conditions, but it'd be very poor conditions for radish on a moisture content basis. This is just another example to show really how dramatic this can be. This is work by Richard Ellis and Eric Roberts, developed models for temperature and moisture content relations of seed storage. And this shows the longevity in years. These are years of lettuce seeds at 30 degrees centigrade. So that's ambient conditions or worse. And you can see that down to 50% relative humidity or so, okay, you might get a year or so. It's not that good. But you can see how dramatically it starts to go up. If you're at 40, 30, 20, by 10%, I mean, it's predicting 30 years to lose viability. Now, that's probably a bit extreme, and you probably aren't going to do that. But as I said, it's all relative. If the clock is ticking, you can think about this, the clock is ticking very fast on the lower right, it's ticking very slow on the upper left. So basically, by just manipulating moisture content, we can get an exponential increase in longevity. So we can actually store seeds potentially for up to years without worrying about cooling if we can get them dry and keep them dry. There's another example. This is from the same type of work of Ellis and Roberts for pepper seeds. Again, warm temperatures, 30 degrees centigrade. And you can see that if they're in equilibrium with high humidity, 90%, 70% humidity, they won't last a year. By next year, they're going to be dead. You won't be able to sell those seeds. If you put them down at 10% or 30%, you can store them a couple of years before they're going to be off. So just to emphasize again that we're really focusing now on preserving as much of that quality as we can. Now, if you store the seeds in a porous container under ambient conditions, they will equilibrate to whatever the atmospheric humidity is. That is, you may dry them, you may do a great job, but if you don't protect them from the environment, particularly in climates like we're in today, where it's warm and humid, the seeds will gain moisture and you will lose all that effort in drying them. Of course, with seeds, we were very concerned with viability and quality and so on, but there's other bad things that happen in storage. There's insects, there's fungi, there's other bad things happen. So this is to show the relationship. Look at the right-hand graph, really, the relative humidity. I'm trying to convince you that's the key one, and that is the one that determines what can grow where. So if things are quite wet, say above 90% equilibrium humidity, you can have everything. Bacteria, fungi, insects, everything can grow. If we can go down to about 65% humidity or below, then we can stop fungi. So they will grow above about 65%, below that they won't. And that turns out to be, if you look across, this is the moisture content for maize. It's about 13%. 12 to 13% is the target that most grain producers and commodity traders want to get to. That's sort of the standard, 13%. Why? That's just where they stop fungi. Makes sense that people have figured out that's about where you want to go. But I've already told you that's not where you get maximum longevity. That just keeps the fungi from killing it. We'll come back to that toward the end. If we go low enough, insects can grow to lower, but below about 35% relative humidity, insects can't grow either. So, in fact, we can stop all the bad pests just by lowering the moisture content sufficiently. Come back to molds again later. The other advantage of relative humidity is it's easy to measure. That is, moisture content, if you're in the grain trade, you have a moisture meter, or if you calibrate one for your crop, that's fine, and you have that. But not many people have that out in the field, and virtually no farmers have that. You can measure moisture content with an oven and the scales, but nobody has that. So the advantage of relative humidity is it's very simple to measure. There's a relative humidity meter that's a few dollars. I don't know what the price is. Johan tells me $3. I can buy $3 US, I can buy a meter, electronic meter. Very simple. You get the temperature and the relative humidity. Even cheaper are these little strips we've discovered. It's like pH paper for humidity. This is a miracle to me. It's just like pink blue paper, just like you measure pH, but it changes color in relation to humidity. If it's pink, you're not under good storage conditions. If it's blue, you're all right. That's pretty simple for a farmer or anybody to do. So it's $10 for 10 meters of this roll, and you need a little piece like that. So it's very, very cheap. And we have some colleagues at Davis who have thought to put that paper inside of a little, what do you call it, laminated card. Dry card. You can pick up one at Johan's booth, by the way, which makes it very handy. That is, you can put your company name on there, and you can advertise, we're concerned about moisture, we're concerned about quality, we're concerned about how our seeds behave. But it's a very simple tool. And what it says is that now, what we found, I'll just say, why is this so important to me? We found in a project I'm going to describe in a minute, trying to come to this part of the world and convince people to dry their seeds, people knew about that, but they did not really recognize the importance of air humidity. That is, people thought if the seeds were dying, I need a cold storage. Not really thinking that the problem that's killing the seeds is the fact it's 85% humidity all the time. So I think awareness is as much as anything the key for this, to take steps then to solve that. So as we said, if we look at the greener it is on this chart, the more humid it is. So this is a humidity chart for the world. And we don't care about the far north because it's cold. But if you look around the region, Asia Pacific, it's all green. It's humid. I'm sure I'm not telling you anything. This is a humid part of the world. And that's the problem. As I said, humidity is death to seeds. So that is the problem. The solution I'm going to tell you about is the dry chain. So that's where we'll go now. So I hope I've convinced you that makes sense. So what do we mean by the dry chain? How many have heard of the dry chain already? Nobody. Johan. Well, we hadn't either. When we first thought of this idea, we went, dry chain? Oh, we looked it up on Google. That's the only thing we could find. Lubricant for bicycle chains and motorcycle chains, the dry chain. That sort of meant there wasn't much out there about it. But who's heard of the cold chain? Okay, there's a few. Come on, anybody work in fresh produce? Come on. If you work in fresh produce, the cold chain is fundamental for post-harvest. That is, everybody knows if you're going to try to, or frozen food, if you're in frozen food or you're in fresh produce, everybody knows the cold chain because it means for those products you have to immediately cool them and then you have to keep them cool all the way to market. That is, you have to have a chain of cooling. You have to have refrigerated trucks, you have to have refrigerated warehouses, supermarkets, and so on. It's a lot of work and a lot of energy, but it has reduced post-harvest losses in fresh produce, in the U.S. at least, to less than 5%. In other words, not very much of the produce is really lost between the harvest and the consumer in the cold chain anymore when you have all of that infrastructure, you have reliable energy supplies so that the coolers don't go down, and you have every link in the chain doing their part. That is, every step of the supply chain has to buy into this. But that's pretty much what we're thinking for the dry chain as well. If we think of really storage options for anything, we really have two axes. We have warm and cold, and we have wet and dry. Right? It's quite simple. Most foods start warm and wet, right? They're plant materials, they're animals, whatever it is, it's warm and wet. They don't store well, all right? We know that they don't store well, they rot. So the cold chain was invented for things that you can't dry, all right? For fresh produce, things like that, you can't dry it, you only can cool it, and it works great, but it requires infrastructure, refrigeration, there's energy costs associated, and so on, but it does work. If we think of dried products, though, we don't have to cool them. We can dry them first. And when you think about it, drying is the oldest storage method probably in the world. Every culture dried foods for preservation. So this is nothing new, but we haven't capitalized on it as thoroughly as we could. So if we can just dry those products that can be dried, that's pretty good storage, as I just tried to show you, that the moisture content itself can be a very effective way to preserve things. So once it's dry and packaged, there's no more energy cost. There's no cost, really, to maintaining that as long as it's packaged. And that's really what we call the dry chain. Dry the product, put it in a package, and leave it in the package. Or if you take it out, be like someone in the cold chain. Be sure it stays dry, put it back in the package when you move it on. Of course, the very best for really long-term storage, particularly for dry things that can be dried, is cold and dry. So for germplasm storage, long-term, stock seed, whatever, certainly dry it. The first thing, put it in the cold. So we'll take the two aspects of the dry chain. First, we have to make it dry. We have to get things dry. So there are many ways to do that. These are some pictures from Nepal, India, various places, sun drying. Almost everywhere, people will sun dry, air dry their products, whether it's seeds, commodities, whatever. It can be very effective when the conditions are right. That is, if it's dry, it works. Unfortunately, you can't dry below the minimum relative humidity of the air, and often not that far. That is, if the air gets humid at night, it gets dry in the day, then you may get to the average. You can cover it at night. These women who are drying this rice seed, at night they're piling it back up. They're going to put a tarp over it to keep the moisture away from it in the evening. Next day they'll do the same thing. It's fine, but there's a limit to what you can do with that. Unfortunately, it's the least effective when you need it the most. That is, when it's wet, rainy, humid, you need the drying the most, it's ineffective. So that's the problem. You have conditions, environmental conditions, where that won't work. Heated air drying is also very available. This California, India, I've taken, there's heated air dryers everywhere in seed facilities. They work. They're very widely used. They're effective. Unfortunately, they are less efficient in warm, humid climates. All they can do is heat the air, which lowers the relative humidity of the air and allows it to absorb moisture from the seed. With seeds, we cannot heat that air more than about 43 degrees centigrade or it'll kill the seeds. All right? So we have a limit. If it's grain, we can go higher, but for seed, we have a limit. So if you're here and it's 35 degrees centigrade and 85% humidity, as it is here, and you heat that air to 43, you don't lower the humidity below about 50% at the minimum. You can blow that air on it all day, and that seed will not get any drier than that thermodynamic limit. So you really have a limit to what you can do with heated air in a wet, hot, humid climate. So that's a limitation that it has. It is costly as well, and it requires energy, particularly the drier you try to go, the longer you have to run the heater, and the more costly it gets. So another strategy, and this is something we've worked with Johan with and is supported by USAID, is to use desiccant-based drying. These are some drying beads, for example, that Johan has developed. Uses a different strategy, that is, absorb the moisture away from the seeds without using heat. That is, just have a desiccant, silica gel or beads. Beads are much more effective. To just absorb the moisture, put the seeds inside a container with the beads, for example, a very simple way. The water will move into the beads and be bound, and it reduces the moisture content of the seed. Then you can reactivate those beads and use them again and again. So it's, again, I heard this morning in a talk about investment. This is an investment, not a throwaway. This is not a consumable. This is an investment. So ways that this can be done, very simple ways, just enclose the beads and the seeds together in an airtight container. Johan has developed these, for example, that have beads down the center, so the diffusion distance is shorter. It does have limits on big bulk things in these things, but up to this size, it's working very well. And then you need an oven to regenerate these beads at your convenience. The nice thing about this is that it can be done with an electric oven, which means you can be off the grid. You can have a solar power supply. You can dry the beads when it's sunny and store them and use them when it's not. I mean, you're off the grid, really, and not using gas or electricity necessarily at the time you're drying. So I'll just mention that through this project, supported by USAID, Johan has been working very closely with certain companies in Bangladesh, for example, seed companies. I mention seed because specifically it's a very good thing to start with. It's a high-value product with low volume. So this is a good strategy, a good product to start with this type of technology. The way this particular project was run was that the companies invested in the technology. They invested in the beads, the boxes, the containers, barrels, and so on. The project provided training. That's the key. Train the staff to understand what they're doing and then put it into practice. Already there are 3 companies involved in this, and Johan tells me that, in fact, none of them do it exactly the same. This is what's nice about this. It's a very flexible technology. You can adapt it to your own system, whatever your seeds are, whatever your process is, and so on. But the concept is to provide this technology to the growers. That is, if a grower is growing 5 kilograms of hybrid tomato seed for you, send them some containers and drying beads and say, when you collect those seeds, put them in the box, put the beads with them, send them back to me dry. I don't need drying facilities. The seeds are safe, and we've preserved as much as possible of that long period. If they sit with the grower for a month at high humidity before they send them back to you, you've lost a whole fraction of that quality before it even gets back in your hands. Okay? So we want to dry as soon as possible, keep them dry. And there are other groups in there, in Bangladesh, taking this up as well. So here's just a quote from the Deputy CEO of Laltir, a big seed company in Bangladesh, saying that they've tested this technology, it dries their seeds, it works, it increases storage potential, and they're going to move forward with doing this in their operations as much as possible. So first step to showing that, people say this is too awkward, it's too unfeasible. It's really not for the scale that we're talking about for high-value seeds. So that's making it dry. How do we keep it dry? That's the second part of the whole thing. Keep it dry once you've got it. Put it in something. Put it in plastic boxes, containers, plastic bags, waterproof containers. There's all types of these. I'm sure if you work in high-value seeds, you're used to packaging your seeds in cans or foil packets and so on at the end point. That needs to be throughout the whole lifetime of the seed. And there's no reason not to scale this up. That is, these bags are porous. It's not the thing that's going to do it. But if you put a plastic liner inside that, there's really not a limit. That is, if you get it dry, find some way to protect that from the environment, you're keeping it dry. There have been projects on this. There's the PICS bags you may be familiar with. It came from Purdue. They're also oxygen-proof, which has some value of its own, but they are moisture-proof. There are plastic, metal silos for farm size. There are super bags from GrainPro. They're developed at Erie and so on, where you can, again, have up to very large scale protection from the moisture in the environment. So that's the key. We even have what we would call a climate-smart dry chain, if you will. This is the temperature, humidity, high humidity and low humidity for West India. And what you can see is that there's a period there, very low humidity. Humidity minimum is 10% or 5%, maximum in 40%, very hot. So if you harvested in that period and used air drying, you're really, really dry. That's great, and you would have a good opportunity for storage. So take advantage of that season. You could do that. But if you don't package it away from that, what happens next? The monsoon comes. Rain comes, humidity goes up, and if you didn't package those seeds when they were dry, you just lost all the value. That is, now they're going to get wet, and you've lost it. So for us, a climate-smart dry chain would be to package and capture dryness when it's in the environment. That is, think about it, that actually dryness itself is value. In other words, dryness means slow ticks on the clock, very long storage itself. There's value in that. If you let it get away, you've given away value. That's the way I think about it, that you have to capture value from the environment. This would be a climate-smart strategy, would only require packaging, no real drying. Now, that's not always possible in every climate, but certainly it could be implemented here. So here's a summary again for the dry chain. What are we going to do? Harvest, you're going to harvest it, and then as quickly as possible, use sun drying, use additional drying, whatever you do, or perhaps a combination. That is, it makes really smart sense to use the atmosphere as much as you can. If that's not enough, then other steps, heated air drying, bead drying, whatever you need to do to lower it a few more. As I say, 2 or 3%, you've got 4 to 8 times the storage longevity. So lowering it a bit more, packaging it is critical. Keep it in moisture-proof packages. Keep them sealed continuously. Again, why let it out? That is, if it's in a package, just keep it there. And then eventually it gets to your consumer, whether it's food or seeds. A few don'ts. Don't store moist seeds in big piles. That's not good, because there's going to be big problems with that. Don't use porous packaging, which is generally what seeds are in. And larger quantities are in porous packages because humidity can get through that. Don't leave the packages open. I mean, if you go into markets selling seed, you see they're sitting in open packages to the air. That's not good. So if they're in bags, and if those were plastic bags, why dump it out on the ground and let the air get to it again? In other words, we have to be conscious all the time that humidity is your enemy. So then we get this is the logo of the dry chain. Make it dry, keep it dry. It's so simple. Just make it dry and keep it dry, and you get big benefits. I want to finish just a couple of slides on scaling this up and sort of challenge the seed industry. This is all possible for the seed industry. I'm seeing a lot of nodding heads. Everybody knows you need to do this. They can see that this is value. They know that preserving high quality is value. But this graph shows graphically the post-harvest food losses. So a lot of speakers here have talked about the importance of the seed industry to their consumer, which is the farmer. The consumer for the farmer is all of us who eat food. And in this part of the world, in these locations that are highlighted, a lot of that food doesn't make it from the farmer to the consumer. About a third of all the food produced in these areas is lost between the farmer and the consumer. If you were in the session this morning looking at trying to increase hybrid rice yields, hybrid rice may give a 30% yield increase. That's great. That's a lot of breeding. It's a lot of effort. We lose 30% just by not handling the grain properly once it leaves the farm. So we can make huge increases in total food by just taking care of that food. The other problem about this type of storage, again, a third of the total product is lost by poor storage of this type. Even worse, because it's humid, molds can grow. Molds make mycotoxins, aflatoxin, fumonisin. It not only makes the food spoiled, it makes it toxic. 4.5 billion people, more than half the people in the world, are eating food that has aflatoxin in it. So that we have to do something about. And if we go back to this slide, you can see that's not just Asia, that's the whole tropical region has that issue with the food, where it's warm and humid. So again, we think the dry chain is the solution for that. Scaling up to food scale is a whole other set of problems, but not unfeasible. Again, we have to be conscious of the problem that we can stop that mycotoxin, that aflatoxin problem simply by enacting proper storage. Drying that commodity below 65% humidity, we will stop that problem. And I want to challenge the seed industry because I believe you are the point of the spear, if you say. That is, it is feasible for you. You have a high-value, low-volume product. You can see the value of treating your product this way. You can see the value of implementing some of these technologies. Put it into practice because showing that it's feasible will spread to the next level. Let's go next to foundation seed. Then we can go to certified seed. Then we can go to commodity. In other words, give us an incentive, give innovators an incentive to actually develop scaled-up systems that can both dry and protect foods from these same types of problems. So with that, I want to thank you. That's our story, and I hope we can have a discussion about it. Thank you very much.
Any questions for Dr. Bradford? Okay. Who is awake? Ah, one is awake there. Good.
How can we implement dry chain? I'm from France, India. So my question is that we are having a lot of paddy seeds during the months of May and June when the humidity and temperature both are extremely high. So when the quantities are large, how can we implement dry chain?
Yeah, how can you do it? Again, if you're talking grain scale, it can be challenging. I mean, if it's rice seed, for example, or paddy. But I think you have to think about it. I mean, on that scale, at current time, probably you need to use heated air because that's available and can be done. Again, every bit that you can do is helpful. In other words, you don't have to take it as dry as possible to be helpful. Again, every moisture, every 1% you're going to gain. If you're in a really wet, humid condition, you can gain a lot by bringing it to whatever you can, okay? If you can use air drying, that's great, but then probably you need a little bit more. But up to fairly good scale. I mean, even for commodities, we've worked with Simmet, for example, in Nepal with foundation seed for maize. That's pretty big quantities. And they found that they could implement the drying system and the sealed container system without too much trouble. It's kind of a trade-off. I mean, it seems like it would be a lot of manual work maybe to put things in, take it out, oven dry it, and so on. But on the other hand, if labor is not so expensive, the value you gain back in higher quality. In other words, what you have to do is think, how much am I going to lose in inventory if I let that seed go beyond viability? How much am I going to lose in reputation if I sell it anyway and it doesn't perform? So in other words, whatever you can do is going to come back and repay you. You see, so I think the specific challenges is when we get to really big scale, we need to work on that. We are working on that. We colleagues at UC Davis just got a grant, a big grant, $1.5 million in the next few years, specifically to engineer scaling up systems that would be based on desiccation rather than heated air, so that in humid climates, we don't have this problem that when you're trying to dry things with heated air in hot, humid climates, it's not very effective. So I think, next 5 years or so, you're going to see systems coming that will certainly be applicable for all scale of seeds. a good question, though.
Any other questions?
It's a really good concept and how to work with the seeds. And especially I'm interested in you mentioned how you should protect the seed from the fungicides and disease. Because it's really a big problem and big issue. Because as you mentioned, it's very humid and hot and Asia country. So I wonder, because in the beginning we care about the red community, let it dry. And I remember raised another issue. So how do you, also here with this kind of problems, in the beginning, what can we do first and avoid more serious problem with the seed?
Yeah. So again, I think the key is to enact the whole system, which is both the drying and the packaging, because and there's published research already from colleagues who've worked on this. That is, even if you dry it initially, but you have it in porous storage and the humidity goes up, then those problems will come back to you. Whereas if you can dry it and you can get it packaged away from the environment, just biologically, thermodynamically, things can't grow. In other words, if you get it below about 65% humidity, fungi can't grow. So you won't have that problem. You won't have molding. Insects can continue to grow to a certain degree, but for seeds, we can actually go down lower. If we go down to 30, 35% relative humidity, insects can't grow either. And again, if you get them there by whatever means and then you package them, you're done. That is, you don't have any problem anymore. They can sit there as long as you want. Other alternatives, interesting technology I learned about here, there's Edwin here sitting here of modified atmospheres. That is, in addition to getting them dry, then you could also put them under vacuum, or you could put CO2 into those chambers and so on. That's part of the strategy with the super bags as well, to change the atmosphere, either low oxygen or high CO2, to kill insects. Okay, and then again, once you've done that and you keep it packaged, they can't come back. I mean, you've killed them all and you don't let them re-enter. So drying will do the same, but if it's really not possible to dry, then I think we need to think of a two-step thing. Dry them to a certain degree, and because, as I showed you before, getting to 65%, that's fine for stopping mold, but the aging of seeds is still going quite fast. We really need to get lower than that for seeds, okay? So we really want to aim a bit lower than that. But the insects, you may not want to go all the way down to 25, 30%. So in the intermediate one, I think we need to think about, since part of the scheme is to have them packaged anyway, now you can think about what can I do in that packaging. Previously, we did things like poison phosgene or something, toxicants that would kill the seeds. Apparently, insects are becoming resistant to that, and it's not working as well. People don't like to handle that, and so just modifying the atmosphere itself, once we now have them in a package, becomes a big opportunity. In other words, it's not that challenging to do that once we get our mindset that I want my seeds in a package anyway. Does that make sense?
One question over there. Two more questions, number 1 and number 2. Okay?
I was thinking about scaling of the seed pipeline. When you have seeds and high moisture, you put them in the beads. I could think so, it's going so quick that you get cracking with the embryo. What we are doing is in Denmark, when we grow when we dry big quantities, you use them on fire, it's a machine, you can put super in it, or you can put beans in it, and then we mix the air a little bit because we don't multiply at 10 degrees, so the 10 degrees, 10% humidity. We make it to 20, so we have a quiet drying to keep the cracking reduced. Another question is, I was thinking, when you have seeds in your plastic bag, and I saw Johan has a machine standing there that was drying, and it was taking the air out of the bag. Will be the difference when you have seeds in it with this relative humidity of 60% with vacuum and non-vacuum, how long the seed longevity or the shell life will be there?
Okay, if I understood your two questions, the first one had to do with perhaps concern about the speed of drying with the beads and so on. You know, in fact, that turns out to be not as a big an issue as you might think. That is, if you put close the whole thing in a container, basically the beads are absorbing moisture from the air. That's lowering the air humidity. Depending on how fast that can evaporate from the seed, it may go to very low humidity initially or not. But in the end, we actually did some work on this and found that, for example, drying rice seed with beads, for example, we just put them all in there, they dried straight down. Whereas if we used heated air, for example, you have to temper them. That is, if you use heated air, the outer surface dries very quickly and seals off the moisture inside. You have to let them sit, and then it equilibrates, and you can dry some more. We actually didn't have that problem. So really, I think when you're using the beads in not high temperature, where you're really forcing the outer surface to dry, it actually is then limited by how fast the water can move internally to a surface and evaporate. So it's really determined by itself. You're not really forcing it to dry, and we didn't really see that. I mean, certainly it's the case if you dry very, very dry and then you handle beans, you're going to break them, or if you try to mill rice. So bringing the final moisture content back to an operational level is important. But I'm not so concerned, particularly for all the small vegetables. We've dried them very directly in beads to very low moisture and then bring them back up. It's not a problem. The other way we have done all the calculations. So if you want to achieve an exact final moisture content, then really all you need to do is measure the initial equilibrium humidity. And Johan has worked out a calculation factor. You say now it's at 85. I want to go to 35. You can calculate exactly how many beads to put in a container with a certain amount of seeds, and then it comes to equilibrium at the end. You won't over dry. So there's all ways to do this. The second one was about putting it inside a vacuum, I believe, and then what the moisture contents would do. Was that the question? The shelf life? Yeah. Well, we've also done some studies on this, and certainly seed aging is related to oxygen. That is, the oxidation of components in the seed are what affect it. The studies we've done on aging at different moisture contents and oxygen, the moisture content is by far the bigger factor. If you don't take care of that, it doesn't matter what you've done with oxygen. Once you've got the moisture content down fairly low and you have a fairly long life, then you can see an effect of oxygen or not. In other words, without oxygen, you get some longer. With it, you don't. So my view is first take care of the moisture content, and then if you really want to get the maximum, particularly, say, for oily seeds or something where you might have more potential for oxidation, then vacuum or anaerobic nitrogen containers and so on would be certainly the maximum. And, seeing here this opportunity for vacuum and so on, I mean, to me, that seems like that could be a very beneficial connection. That is, dry it first so you get the longevity, put it in the vacuum so you've taken care of the oxygen, and also it's very visible. When you see that the package is under vacuum, you know it's sealed. You're not having any leaks. It's there. And, it's interesting. I heard a discussion the very first day here about climate-smart farming, where, suddenly you see that there's going to be a flood coming this season. Farmers might want to switch varieties. How are you going to have stockpiled all kinds of varieties to just switch to? If they're going to die in a year, you can't do that. But if you could imagine that we could dry those seeds very, very dry and get 5-10 years of storage, put them in a vacuum and put them away, there is the potential that you could have a lot more flexibility. Somebody's got to pay for that storage. Somebody's got to pay for that warehousing and so on. But I think it's achievable in terms of actually keeping seeds viable so you could have that flexibility by the combination. Very dry storage and then potentially storing under anaerobic conditions to get the maximum. Does that answer?
The last question was over there.
Actually, I have two questions. This way to price seed is very efficient for the small quantity. As a company we are dealing with rice, maize, do you have any good way to keep seed dry and dry seed for crop seed? My second question is, we supply a lot of cold storage for our products in other Asian countries to make sure that they keep seed in safe condition. But the relative humidity in this area is very high. We are trying our best to to reduce the relative humidity inside the cold storage. But if you want to reduce below 70%, it's very good. So my client's not satisfied. They say the cold relative humidity should be around 60, but it's very hard. But the engineer told me, it is already said, if the humidity is set, because outside the humidity is around, relative humidity is around 95, so now it reduces to 70.
Yeah.
Do you have that kind of research, the relation between the humidity, the relative humidity, or absolute humidity, the life procedure?
I'll deal with the second question first. This is a big issue of cooling. When you cool air, the humidity goes up. So when you have a cold storage, that needs to have a dehumidification system with it. And generally the way they do that is they cool the air quite below that level to pull moisture out of the air, and then they heat it back up. But Johan tells me, he's looked at this very carefully, and he tells me that almost invariably they over-specify the cooling and under-specify the dehumidification. So here's the situation. If you put those seeds in the cold and it's at 70% humidity, those seeds, if they're not packaged, will go to 70% humidity. Their moisture content will go up. As long as they're in the cold storage, it's not a big problem. But what happens when you take them out to ship them, send them to the farmer? Now they're out in the heat and they're at 70% humidity. That's when they're going to die really fast. So you take it out and you do a test right from the cold room. You say, hey, these seeds are great. And they probably are. But as soon as you take them out and you put them on a truck and you send them to a farmer and it sits in their, in their yard for a month and then finally they plant it, they're dying. The clock is ticking really fast. So that's the problem of putting seeds in porous containers in cold storage. If you want to use cold storage, dry it thoroughly first, put it in a package, and then put it in the cold storage. Then you're great. That's fine. But if you put it in open packages in a cold room, the humidity is very high and they're going to absorb moisture. And that's what you don't want. So be careful how you use humidity. The other problem when you're using cold storage in areas where the power supplies can be turned off. If you lose power and you lose the dehumidification system, you can have condensation. You open the door, it's 95% humidity outside. Air comes in and it's cold. Immediately you got moisture condensing on your seeds, you have fungi, you have bad problems. So you have to be very careful. That's why from us, the first thing to deal with is the moisture, the packaging, and then you can put it in the cold. On your other question about how to deal with crop seeds, we are actually working on that. We realize that we need a larger scale system. And as I say, we have colleagues, there are colleagues around the world, but we have ag engineers at Davis who are working on how can we adapt a desiccant-based system for high volume. Because the advantage of the desiccant system, it's not limited to just heated air difference. We need another system where we can really dry air quite dry, even in humid conditions. And actually, there are ways to do that, but it needs some engineering. As I say, I think it's coming. I think where it will first be introduced is in the commodity seed world because you recognize the problem. It's higher value. I heard about hybrid rice this morning, higher value seed. We need that type of scaling up. So it's coming. I mean, you can imagine ways. For example, if you just blow air through a container of beads, very dry, warm air comes out the other side. So we can create dry air. What we have to do is make a very efficient system to then regenerate those beads in a way that's energy efficient and continuously keep that supply so that you can continuously get a flow of dry air generated from a desiccant rather than from heating. And I just mentioned that, as I didn't really emphasize, but I'm sure you're aware, that the combination of high moisture and high temperature is the worst possible thing for seeds. So in fact, when we bring seeds in and we put them in a heated air dryer, they're at high moisture and they're at high temperature. So that's the ticking the fastest it can go. Okay? That's an advantage of using desiccants is that you don't have to use the heat. We just lower the humidity, we take the moisture directly, and we don't have the combination. So again, maximum saving of potential lifetime of the seeds. But we need better technology, and I'm optimistic it's coming for scaling up.
We don't want only to maximize longevity of our seeds, but also the use of Camp Bradford. So some more questions. There was some questions over there, please. Because we don't have the chance to have Dr. Ken Bradford here in Asia every day, so we better use him to the max. Sorry, Ken.
I'm here as long as you need, but if you have other business to do, I'm certainly receptive to that.
Hello, my name is
Yeah.
Erica. I'm from Taiwan. Thank you for your wonderful presentation. I would like to, I wonder, after the good situation of dry, the germination or the growth behavior would be changed. Yes, any evidence to show or the farmer could do any work when they receive this kind of dry seed. Thank you.
So if I understand correctly, you're saying, are there any adverse effects or bad consequences to drying? Yeah. Well, in the literature, there's a lot of concern you'll see about over-drying. So usually on a moisture content scale, they will say, don't go below here. And that's possible, but we really haven't seen that, particularly in all the small vegetable seeds. We've dried them very, very dry. We've put them directly back in water. They seem to be fine. Now, it's clear that if you have legumes, you have beans, alfalfa, things like that, you can make the seeds hard where they won't absorb water. If you get them over dry, then you drop the bag from here to the ground, you lose half the germ. I mean, they become physically sensitive to damage, which is a problem. So you have to be concerned about that. But really, I think that there are examples from gene banks, for example. People dried seeds extremely dry, put them in little glass vials for 40 years, broke the glass, they come out, they're perfectly okay. So I think, you see, it's hard to discriminate because in the past, the way people dried seeds to very low moisture contents, very long heated air drying. So as you're heating, you're drying, you're just extending that time at high temperature, that's probably hurting the seeds more than anything. But we do give the caution that if you can take seeds down quite dry, many gene banks store seeds at 15% humidity. So, I mean, this is a common practice in gene banks to take them down very low. But I would say that for planting and so on, I think it would be wise to rehydrate them somewhat. And, in these types of climates, all you have to do is take them out of the packaging. In other words, if you just take them out ahead of time for a week or so and let them sit in the air, they will absorb slowly and not have a problem, right? So the other problem is that, very dry seeds imbibe quickly is exacerbated by the cold. So if you're not doing it in a cold climate, you don't tend to have imbibition damage either. So I think the negatives are much, much less than the negative of having them at high temperature. I think that's where you really get obvious effects. And I think there will be some problems potentially on over-drying with damage, physical damage, but we have to learn how to handle that, I think. The advantages are going to outweigh that. Yeah. Is there a question?
Yes, over there.
Hello. Thanks, Ken, for your presentation. My name is Colin from Cisco, the Architects Company in Zimbabwe. You spoke of three aspects, germination, vigor, and longevity. For us, it's quite clear how we measure germination in okay. There are tests which we conduct. The vigor also, there are tests which we take for vigor. Longevity, are there techniques available now to give us indication of longevity for the seed which you have? Thank you very much.
Yeah, that's a very good question. How do you predict or anticipate longevity? How do you know how much you have left? About the only way to do that is actually do an aging test, do a controlled aging test, and even there, I have my own ideas about that. We did a lot of work using, for example, the ISTA test for soybeans and so on, where you put it over 100% humidity, you put it over water, and then you put them at high temperature for 3 or 4 days. You can kill seeds very effectively that way, but it doesn't correlate very well with potential storage. So when we do those storage tests, we put our seeds over, say, 60%. Even 75% humidity, which is over sodium chloride, is a very convenient way to have a standard humidity, is a little bit too high for me. That's a very tricky area. I prefer to go to 60%. If you have a saturated salt that it gives you 50, 60%, and then you put them at 50 degrees centigrade, I mean, it's a very high temperature, but again, you're trying to age them. It's better to have a little lower humidity and a higher temperature. So if you use about 60% humidity and 50 degrees centigrade, in a couple of weeks, you can see a very clear, 1 week, 2 weeks, you can see a very clear aging, and you can use that to compare lots. You can say, under my standard conditions, my seeds will die in 3 weeks under those conditions. You know if you bring in a lot and it dies in 1 week, you have a problem. You see, so it's all relative. It's just relative to how much you have. But that's the only thing you can do. If you do that, though, if you consistently do that test when it comes in, you do it consistently again 6 months later. I showed the slide. We have a model that you can fit that data to. It will predict how long are they going to last under the conditions that I'm in. In other words, once we know how that particular seed lot behaves. But you see, you don't know where you are in that plateau phase, and the only way to test that is to try it. If they're really good seeds and you age them, they're still going to be at high viability. You say, great. If they're about to fall off the cliff and you age them, they fall off the cliff, you know that you don't have much storage life. So I am an advocate for controlled deterioration tests using more moderate humidities and higher temperatures.
Okay. Good. Oh, yep.
One more.
No problem. You're this time the last one, okay? Maybe I changed my mind again. Yeah, sorry, you're right.
Thank you so much. You have answered so many questions that came to my mind. And some of the Asbrouk issue. And I just want to wonder something, which we are in seed company. We are producing the seeds by contracting the farmers. And our situation sometimes, the farmers have theft of our seeds. So we have to harvest, I'm talking about corn. We might harvest early with a moisture of 37 centigrade. Okay? So I'm sorry, yes. We dry it very well. We keep it also in cold storage, in modified cold storage, and we treat the seeds very well in our seed can. But in my opinion, I think this will affect the viability of seeds next season or not. Because I know that it should not exceed more than 35% while you are harvesting this. Thanks.
Yeah, I don't have a lot of personal experience with corn, but I know that in sweet corn, for example, the shrunken corn, they harvest at very high moisture content. It's very bad quality seed. So, I mean, on corn, from the bottom up, the bottom of the ear will be mature, the top of the ear will not be. And so I think the maturity there, I mean, the moisture content is a good indication of maturity. And again, if you're harvesting them early, those seeds that are not fully mature will not have much longevity. And so that's going to be the issue. It occurs in many, many of our seeds, all of the brassicas, carrots, onions, things where you have indeterminate growth. We have this severe problem of having mature seeds and immature seeds on the plant at the same time. So that's really a big problem. My own view as a geneticist approach would be, let's solve that. Let's don't have shattering. Let's fix shattering. In other words, beans don't fall off the plant. Wheat doesn't fall off the plant. Let's make it for all of our crops. The seeds will all mature, and we have time to wait. But for your issue in corn, I'm not, I don't really know what to do about that. I think, to me, the best thing would probably be, if you have to harvest really early, probably let it sit for a while. In other words, let it dry down somewhat slowly. Let those seeds finish maturation, and then, once they're down maybe 25% or so, now they're just aging. In other words, they can't do any metabolism anymore, and you might as well dry them. Because you may be able to get some more maturity in those seeds just from the resources that are on the cob, for example. They could go ahead and do a little maturity. In other words, I don't think I would put them directly into the cold because you're going to stop everything. It will preserve them. I know in peppers, bell peppers, for example, they do sometimes harvest and just let them sit for a while because they get less dormancy and a few other things happen. There's some maturity. So it'd be a trade-off. I would do some small-scale trials before committing to either way. But that's a real problem. If you have to harvest early, you will have shortened the longevity and you have to treat them much better. Of course, you can compensate for that with better storage, and then it becomes really important to have really good storage. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Dr.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. In our committee, we we worked already a few years on an application where we can use chromatography equation, Ellison-Roberts equation. In other words, we can predict germination. We can predict also, we can measure that relationship that Ken just described between equilibrium, relative humidity, and seed moisture content. The whole equation is ready, and we wanted to give it to you here today. However, due to some other reasons, we do need first to get the blessing from the executive board on that, so we had to postpone that. But I have good news on that. I talked to Heidi about it and so on, and those who want it, please send an email to myself or to people of my company. We will send you the equation directly from our company, because we cannot do that in name of APSA at this moment, because we need first the authorization to do so. But we can do it out of our own company. So if you are interested in getting that equation, it's two equations. The first one tells you if I have, for example, rice seeds, and I store them at that temperature and that humidity, and that is a germination, and I'm going to store them for 6 months, what would be the estimated, and I underline estimated, germination after 6 months? Or what would be the impact if I dry my seeds 2% deeper? How much more germination would I keep within a certain period? That's the first equation. It's based on the Ellison-Roberts equation, which is a very commonly used equation in the seed technology. The second equation is the chromatography equation, and there it gives you, for every species, the possibility, if I put seeds in that temperature and that relative humidity in my warehouse, what would be the moisture content of my seeds after equilibration. So those who want to get that application, just let us know, and we will send you directly from our company. I'm sorry it took already 2 years to get there, but we are there. Now we have it. But between having it and distributing it, apparently, it's another point. So, well, we get there. I would like to hear from you one more thing. As a seed technology committee, and let me be frankly and open to you, we are struggling. And I don't know what is really, what should we try to do in this committee? What are the benefits for you people? What do you expect from this committee? And how do you see that? And who could do that? That is something that I would really like to know. Ken Bradford giving here this talk, and I see all those questions, it proves that there is a need for this kind of thing. It proves there is a need for that information. But what do you really would like to see from this committee? I would like to open the floor to all of you. Please tell me, do you think this is a good stuff? And if yes, would you like to have more of these talks, or would you like that we do certain things, or we do trips to certain countries for certain, looking to certain technologies, or do you want more that we describe some technologies? It's your committee. We do this for you, so you please tell us what you want. And I would like now people to talk. Yeah. This time you're the first one.
First, I wanted to say that it's for the whole seed company. Their role is to produce the seeds and earn money. So if you are not following the right seed technology, we are in a big loss. So I appreciate very much. I learned too much by attending such seminar or conference in this
Yeah.
session. What I would suggest kindly to make it universal, what everybody has raised so many questions. So whatever the questions is, to make it as a periodical newsletter to give the answer to those people with all the gas should educate them. Apart from that, also some other meetings in the future to have such good scientists like Dr. Sarah. And
But, yeah.
we have so many people can talk about seed technology, but by your kind selection, we can appreciate it very much. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Any other comments, suggestions? Yes, please.
Thank you. I would like to follow the suggestion because I think that because all this company, as mentioned, is in Asia is kind of such a humid and hot condition, and the seed company they want to earn money, but they also help the farmer to earn money, and then they earn money to win. So it's really a critical issue to get a good seed and quickly to get a farmer because the season is coming soon, cannot wait anymore. So I would like to follow. I think the seed technology should more focus on the tropical and subtropical. Yeah, because a lot of the technology is always focused on temperature, country, and very few technology study or research focus on this area. So I would like to follow this
Okay.
recommendation. If can focus on Asia, have a conference, seek technology. Yeah, that is, I think invite a
Good
lot of
point.
scientists and
Good
to
point.
try to help farmers, seed company, producer,
Yeah.
to solve the problem, especially because the climate is harder to change and a lot of disease. And even you get a seed, but sometimes they contaminate with some virus, fungi, and sometimes you want to have this kind of seed to all over the world is the problem. So you need to try to do the treatment and clean. So waste a lot of time and waste a lot of energy to do this. I think if we have a more seed technology, knowledge technique in the beginning to solve most problem, not just
Yeah.
to how to say already have problem
Yeah.
we try to solve. Thank you.
I think you make a very good point. What you see in technology average, there are extreme efficient and good technologies out there. But unfortunately, many of them are not adapted to our specific needs, especially tropical, subtropical, warm, humid climates. I see many people who buy perfect dryers. They bring them over from Europe to here, they install them and they don't work. And then they say, why? And then I said, yeah, you bought a good dryer, but you didn't buy the climate. You know, that's a lot of times you see this kind of things, and I fully agree there. That's a good point. Together, we see already good stuff. Anybody else? Yes, please.
I'm from Prof.
Yeah.
This is a question about seed dormancy. Because we are talking about seed health,
Yeah.
seed storage. But there are a lot of crops or species which are particular to Asia. For them, there are no references or no global protocols available to do the study of how to tackle the seed dormancy issues. So if this committee can take up some projects
Thank you very much. On that part, it's a good opener for one thing I would like to discuss with you. A few months ago, we had the first webinar where we discussed maturity and so on, and maturity. Shelf life. We addressed shelf life. Thank you. First question, who did see that webinar? Can you please raise your hand? Not many. So, first of all, that webinar is available on the website. It's still there. So if you are interested on shelf life, go to the APSA website, go to that webinar, and click on it. It's only 15 minutes, so it's not too long, and I hope it will not be boring. On that part, our question was, what other topics would you like? Because our idea is to set up such a webinar on a regular form. So every 2-3 months to have one webinar on one specific question. And what you said, sir, it could be definitely one of those webinars where we can say, okay, one person I know, which is, my opinion, one of the most knowledgeable people on dormancy is Dr. Henk Hilhorst from Wageningen University. He already agreed, and he is at this time working on a webinar for us for this kind of thing, for dormancy. So in the near future, you will get that kind of possibility. And please, if you have other topics where you say, hey, this is a real important thing for me, this is something we have some problems. I know that we, as for the moment a very small committee, and I come back on that, but we don't know all the answers, but we know a lot of people who probably know the answers. So we can bring them as a webinar. It's relatively easy. It doesn't cost you traveling. You can look at it, you can re-look at it, and you can look at it with your own people if you want to use those webinars in your companies. And if you have questions for those webinars, you have some topics, let us know. Also, please, if you like something, or if you don't like something, let APSA know. Because it is nothing worse than doing things and we have no idea if people look at it or not, if they use it, if they like it or not. We don't know. So feedback is very welcome. And I just said a very small committee. I would really like to invite you all, and please take this serious. And I know you all work for companies, and maybe you have to talk to your boss, because it will take some of your time, but please do so. Look if you could join the committee. It is not a very time-consuming, it is not very expensive, it just takes some of your time. Most of the meetings are going through Skype or Zoom or another program that APSA is using for conferences through the web, so we can do that. But we need your help, because we cannot do it with the little people we are here. Make this committee stronger. Give your inputs. Tell us what you think. If you can help, help. Together we can be stronger. Because it's really important. And we can say it, food safety. We in the seed industry, and seed technology is the key to make sure that we have seeds, to make sure that farmers can make food, make sure that that food gets to the consumers, and that those people get food to eat and to live and to live and to enjoy life. And I think that's something very important. If you look to the population in Asia, we know that there is more people living in Asia than outside Asia. On the other side, if you look to money spent on seed technology, it's less than 20%. And we need just most of it, because we need to produce more food in the most difficult circumstances. So we have to start to do something, and we cannot do a lot of things, but we can start with something. So please, if you can, look what you can do for us. And together we can make sure that we have more of those things. We will work further on those webinars, because we do believe what you said about the magazine. Yes, sure, we are talking, we are trying, but the problem is we are only so little people, and we have to do also our own job. So we cannot really spend too much time on this. So if other people join us, it will be easier, and together we can do more. So please, come and see us, join us, and together we can be stronger. Thank you. Next point on the agenda, the session summary.
Firstly, I want to thank Professor Bradford. He showed us the concept of viability, vigor, and longevity in terms of seed storage. And his dry chain model provides a basis for developing effective and affordable alternative to the common use method of handling and storing seeds that have been harvested with very high humidity in countries like here that prevail throughout tropical and subtropical climate across Asia and Pacific. And such conditions are linked to the rapid loss in viability of the seeds. Previously demonstrated successfully in several Asian countries, for example, Bangladesh. And the dry chain model starts immediately after harvest and continues throughout the value chain. Not only can it help increase seed viability, but also been demonstrated to reduce the overall storage costs. And the other, through our free discussion, we not only discuss the viability. If you want to, please send your email to Johan or his colleague, but also discuss the future activities, inviting all our participants to join us together, and also including the consideration of new waiver subjects. And the ways to encourage through the join some programs such as probably climate smart dry chain in the future, or something like phenotyping, automatic phenotyping on seeds that will most beneficial to our EPSA members. Thank you. That's my summary.
Dr. Datlani, can I ask one question? For that app, would it be possible that the people who want the app send an email to APSA asking us to give it? It's not APSA who gives it, but it's easy because everybody knows the APSA email, and otherwise a lot of people will not know where to go maybe. Okay, so if you want the applications, can send an email directly to us, can send one to APSA saying, we would like to get the application from Johan, and then we will do so. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you so much. With that, we come to an end of the technical part of Asian Seed Congress 2017. This was the last technical session for this year's Congress, and we look forward to having all of you and all your friends also at the next Congress and at the next sessions. Now, just a couple of points about this committee. One of the things I was happy that Johan mentioned about those webinars. That was a new initiative which we had taken this year, and the first one was very successful because we had 20-odd people joining the call, and there was a lot of questions will be asked. And as he mentioned that you can ask the questions at that time, or maybe you can send the questions later. Somebody had raised a point about a kind of a newsletter giving answers to certain questions. Well, we are starting a column in our magazine which will be the questions will be answered by the experts, and all those related to seed technology. Mostly their questions are related to seed technology. We'll be taking the help of Johan and Dr. Sochi to address those. And wherever we need, we seek the expertise from outside. Now let me, on behalf of APSA, thank Johan and Dr. Sochi for their excellent support which they have provided to this committee over years, and I'd like to thank them with a small token of our appreciation. I have the pleasure of having on stage Professor Bradford.
Can I ask one more applause for all of you, because you're here too. Thank you.
Before you go, just one small announcement. For all the mails which you want to send to APSA with regard to viability app or whatever, please address them to our membership program officer, Kuna. Just write Kuna, Kuna, @apsac.org. She'll just put it on the screen also for you to take down so that you have no problem. Please note it down for your use. Thank you.